Alright guys, Tyler here. Welcome back to the Mets office. Now, we've sort of circled back around to Interplay because we're getting this question a lot. It is a common one that we see all over the place as a good way to compare different examples within the same sport. So we're talking about energy system interplay with a netball centre and then a netball goal shooter or goalkeeper. So they're just that 1/3. Now, the key here is we don't, unless we get given a set of data that covers a 30-second stretch of the game or a video or something. If we're talking about a whole quarter or a whole match of netball, we're talking about 10 to 15 minutes for a quarter, 40 minutes to an hour for the game, right? So that is enough. That's enough for us to go, right, this is going to be an aerobically dominant event or sport. You cannot be anaerobically dominant for 15 minutes. Right? It's not, we're going to have too much accumulation of byproducts. The fatigue's too much. We're going to have to rely on that aerobic energy system. So in both cases here, if we're talking about a whole quarter of netball, I've got my goal shooter up top and I've got my centre here. They are aerobically dominant. Now what we've tried to show here, the blue area on both graphs, that is going to be our aerobic contribution. The red is our anaerobic glycolysis system and then the green is the ATP-PC system. Now we don't need to give a blow by blow. I'm going to talk through sort of a whole quarter or a 10-minute quarter, let's say. If we're going to, and then we'll talk at the end how we might answer this question if it was given to us in an exam. So we've got our goal shooter up the top here. Now remember, the goal shooter is only allowed in 1/3, and typically the goal shooter is going to spend most of their time in the shooting circle. We're not going to move too far outside of that. So let's say the quarter starts, maybe the other team has the centre pass, so the ball goes down the other end of the court. The goal shooter is basically going to be standing under the ring. All right, so very passive at this point. We've got this sort of resting level here. Now, as the ball comes in, they might have to jostle for position, make one short lead to grab the ball. Now, if we watch what happens, what we're going to see maybe one really explosive step, and then once they get the ball, everything sort of stops. Everything slows down, right? The goal shooter turns around, takes their time. So for that very short period, there was a very, very high intensity, but it was only for a second or two. So what it's saying is, right, ATP-PC system here, we're being passive, most explosive, dominant, we get slight increases everywhere. ATP-PC system. Now let's say we drain the shot, ball goes back to the centre. Again, the shooter and the keeper are now standing there waiting. Passive recovery, there's a good key. Passive recovery, PC replenishment from that short effort. Ball comes, we can have another effort and we can see ATP-PC, increased contribution, dominant for that short period. Right, but still we're aerobically dominant, aerobically dominant, aerobically dominant. So there's all these periods where it's an aerobically dominant. We have these increases in contribution. In the goal shooter's case, a lot of ATP-PC due to those passive recoveries. Now, there are going to be maybe periods like this where we have longer efforts. Maybe we miss a shot or the ball turns over and it comes back. So we don't have as big a passive recovery. So our effort stays up for longer. Right, so we see the aerobic system, we get those acute responses come up, increasing its contribution. Remember our epoch? So once that effort's over, heart rate, everything doesn't just go back to zero. Right, they're going to stay up. So we can see this sort of dotted line saying my oxygen consumption starts to come back down. But by the time the next effort comes, the aerobic contribution is already higher than resting levels. However, we've had passive recovery, so we can keep relying on this ATP-PC system to be the dominant provider. Now, maybe by this point of the quarter, we've had multiple efforts in a row with very short passive recoveries. PC stores might be depleting. So in this case, that anaerobic glycolysis system's increased contribution more for this particular effort. Then we might get back to a longer passive recovery, maybe so 20 seconds, 30 seconds. Remember that 30-second passive recovery, 70% replenishment. So the next effort, we can see that ATP-PC system, but again, running out of PC stores as the anaerobic glycolysis. And we see this go on, so on and so forth. Epoch, you can see greater aerobic contributions in each effort later in the quarter compared to earlier. Because of that epoch, heart rate, all of those acute responses are a bit more elevated. The key here, the key for the goal shooter is that they do have passive recovery. Right, so they are going to have some passive recoveries. We're going to be able to see an increased contribution from both anaerobic systems, but a lot from the ATP-PC system. Again, if you get a 30-second effort, you want to sort of, or a 1 minute worth of play, look for passive recoveries. Has there been any? Has there not? Use that to sort of guide your answer. We'll talk about centre and then we'll talk about how we might answer the question. By contrast, all right, what we want to see in this is that in the goal shooter, lots of very low passive recoveries. The centre has pretty much none. I've given one where, who knows what happened here, maybe there's an injury timeout or something and there was one period, but basically no passive recovery. So the main difference is the centre's not going to be able to replenish PC stores. So let's say game starts, doesn't matter who has the centre pass, the centres start moving. Just like we know, ATP, PC, dominant initially, very explosive, provides that energy straight away. While we're going through oxygen deficit, anaerobic glycolysis, increasing its contribution. Aerobic system becoming dominant. Now we get to here and then we start to reduce intensity. The aerobic system is providing almost all the energy as the intensity is low. Maybe we're jogging up the court to make position, something like that. Increase intensity. Every time we have these bursts of speed, we see an increased contribution from anaerobic glycolysis. No passive recovery. PC stores depleted here. We're not really going to see any change in that contribution now. Here's a bit of a dip. Now remember that epoch. So we don't see our oxygen, our aerobic supply go back to rest. That epoch keeps it up. So when this next increase in intensity happens, we've already got our aerobic system ready to go here. So we still increase contribution from anaerobic glycolysis, but we're getting greater aerobic contribution to those efforts. About here, we see that stays up. So this little effort here, we don't need as much from that anaerobic system. We're already up and going aerobically. Again, epoch. And we can see quite clearly in both examples, they're aerobically dominant. We have changes in intensity, we have increased contributions from those anaerobic systems. Now, if we got asked a question and it was, you're not going to draw something like this, hopefully that makes sense to you guys and maybe that clears up what's happening throughout an intermittent sport. We can use this sort of idea for any team sport, really. You just need to think about, not many team sports are going to have these, but big fields, AFL, you might see some passive recoveries. Basketball, we're probably going to be more like this. Times on the bench, you might have to consider that. If we sit on the bench, obviously we're going to be down here for a while. PC replenishment. If we get asked this question, we're going to say that across a 15-minute quarter of netball, the aerobic system will be the dominant provider of energy due to the duration, right? 15 minutes. Both players are going to have increases in intensity. They're going to have short bursts of high intensity, which is going to result in increased contribution from the anaerobic systems. The difference being, with the goal shooter, they are going to have periods of passive recovery to allow PC replenishment. So they're going to be able to have a greater reliance on the ATP PC system for those increases in intensity, those explosive efforts, before they have their passive recovery again. And we'd say as opposed to the centre, who is almost constantly on the move, so no passive recovery, they're going to need to rely on the anaerobic glycolysis system for the increasing contribution during those higher intensity efforts. That hopefully clears that up a little bit. If you've got any questions about that or you want anything, if you want that clarified even more, just let us know. And if you have any other specific examples you'd like us to talk about, again, send us a message and we can get onto those. Otherwise, thank you for watching.
And just very finally, guys, a key point that Tyler mentioned there is that over the duration, the total duration of a quarter, we're going to be aerobically dominant. If the question was identify one point, like this effort here is anaerobically dominant, as is this, as would that be, so on and so forth. But if you talk about the whole duration of the quarter, as you can see, there's always aerobic contribution. That whole quarter is going to be aerobically dominant. Sometimes individual efforts might be anaerobically dominant, whether that be the ATP PC system or the anaerobic glycolysis system. Probably not so much the case in the centre example because they always have quite a large aerobic contribution. So just have a look at the question, what is it asking, and then break it down to those two things. What is the intensity, what is the duration, because that's our energy system interplay.